icy, snowy road, thinking about places we've lived when everything would be totally shut down and you guys don't blink an eye. I grew up in Michigan, took driver's ed on ice. You know, this is not unusual for me either. And it was a real picnic driving in southern Louisiana when they had snow or ice. I wasn't worried about the snow or ice. I was just worried about all those drivers that didn't know what they were doing. Okay, today I'm going to give you a brief overview of what we're doing in the evening meetings. Daniel 11, and the good news is Jesus is coming again, and Daniel 11 is the greatest evidence I have of how soon that might be. Now, if you love Jesus, that should be really good news. It is to me. I was in an email exchange with Doug Batchelor earlier in the week, and I said my greatest regret is it hasn't happened as fast as I want it to. And so, okay, there we go. If you've gone to an Adventist school and you studied prophecy in the school, you're going to realize that in Daniel, they cover Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 9, and they kind of blow by 10, 11, 12 and hope you don't ask a question. That's just the way it works. Here's the problem. It says in Daniel 11, verse 40 and 45, that this is at the time of the end. Nowhere else does it give us that information. And in Daniel 12:4, it says this will be understood at the time of the end. So if this is the message for the time of the end, maybe it's time that we understand it. Let me say it another way. Daniel 8 has a symbolic vision. Then he's given an interpretation of that vision, and it gives him the 2300 days. That was present truth in the 1800s, the beginning of the judgment. It's still true today, but it's not present truth. People don't really care about the 1840s out there on the street, do they? Next, it goes to Daniel 9, talks about righteousness. And this is all part of unpacking Daniel 8. Daniel 8 through 12 are all a unit, actually. And in Daniel 9, it's talking about the righteousness of Christ. In 1888, present truth in the Adventist Church was all about righteousness by faith. And it's still true, isn't it? But that's not what's grabbing people in our world today. Your present truth today will come from the 10, 11, 12 vision, and the part of that vision that talks about the time of the end will light the fire over the whole rest of those truths that are still there. But that's not what will get people's attention. It'll be the time of the end present truth. That's why we shouldn't be ignoring Daniel 11 and 12. Now, you know those powers, and if you were here last night, you know each one of them comes in from the north. Medo-Persia comes in from the north. Jeremiah calls them kingdoms of the north. The Greeks come in from the north. Then the Greek Empire splits 4 ways, but Daniel only cares about 2 in Daniel 11, the one north and the south, the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. And Israel and Jerusalem get caught in the middle. And from that time on, God's people are caught in the middle. Then you have the Roman Empire. They come in from the north. Then the Roman Empire splits. You have a Christian north, Islamic south. And what city is still caught in the middle? Jerusalem. It's just like the Greek split. God gave us all this stuff about the Greek split so we could understand our time period in our split in the Roman Empire. But look at this. It's not just a localized conflict, it's a globalized conflict. What's the day of worship for Israel? Sabbath. But the new covenant in Jeremiah 39 and repeated in the New Testament says that the new covenant is with the house of Israel. When you become a new covenant believer, you become an Israelite. That's why Ephesians 2 says when you accept Jesus, you become a part of the commonwealth of Israel, even though you're a Gentile. And in the new covenant, he said he writes his law in our hearts and in our minds. That would include the Sabbath, wouldn't it? And so what was localized just became globalized. God's got Sabbath keepers all over the world. But the king of the north didn't want to be called Jewish or Israelite during the Jewish-Roman wars, so changed the day of worship from Sabbath to Sunday. The king of the south, Islam, did not want to be called Jewish or Israelite, changed the day of worship from Sabbath to Friday. And where did God's covenant people get caught? Right in the middle between these two powers. And it doesn't matter what part of the world you're in. you're still caught in the middle. Have Muslims ever killed Sabbath keepers? Have Christians ever killed Sabbath keepers? A Sabbath keeper gets caught in the middle all over the world. And this is supposed to be hard to understand, folks. It's pretty simple when you look at it. And you just drop it on the map, both the localized and the globalized, it all shows up really easy. And you realize what's happening locally is happening worldwide. Matthew 24, Jesus talking about the fall of Jerusalem. It was literal after the cross, but he also gave it a globalized application to all his people of faith. And he said, in understanding Daniel, and if we use Jesus' interpretation method after the time of the cross, that's exactly what we get. It is both localized and globalized. We have the Crusades, the Ottomans, and the Reformation. And the good news is, God's got a people from both Islam and Christianity that are looking for him. But there are both people in Islam and Christianity that are worshiping the same false god of force, fear, and anger. Do it our way or else. God's people get caught in the middle. But the amazing thing in Daniel 11, you're used to this part. God calls a remnant out of Babylon, the king of the north, right? You're used to that. But in Daniel 11, he also calls a remnant out of Islam. Well, why couldn't he do it from both of them? He's God, right? And they come together, God's remnant from both Islam and Christianity, and they proclaim the loud cry together. Now, you can graph this one out. You have the Crusades right in here, Arab Islam, and those were Arab caliphates. What is a caliphate? It really would help you to understand today's world to know that. A caliphate is when you have a Muslim leader that is claiming to be the worldwide leader of Islam, both politically and spiritually. And you had Arab caliphates in this time period up through the Crusades. And by the way, these years up here, those are the first and second woe. And they match Daniel's conflicts. Daniel and Revelation, surprise, surprise, they agree with each other. By the way, how many woes are there in Revelation? And there are 3 conflicts between Islam and Christianity in Daniel 11. You go to an 1840s or 1850s Adventist chart, and you're going to find Arab Islam, Ottoman Islam on those charts. We believe that Islam was an indicator of where we stood in prophecy in the 1840s and 1850s. Somewhere along the line, we dropped it. That was a mistake. It's still the same Bible. And we go into a third conflict when we'd have a third time of caliphates. And radical Islam, in my understanding, will go down. Moderate Islam will follow the Pope. And you have God's remnant that come together for the loud cry right at the close of the judgment. Well, let's try going in the right direction. Let's take a look at what it actually says in Daniel 11:40 to 43. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him. So that would be Islam pushing against the king of the north. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots and horsemen and many ships. He shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through. He shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. He shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. I want you to notice, Daniel is naming names. At the beginning of this prophecy in Daniel 11, when he said Persia, he actually meant Persia, right? When he said Greece, he meant Greece. We got in trouble when we said, oh, this must be symbolic in verses 40 to 45. And it created chaos in the Adventist church in understanding Daniel 11. The thing of it is, there's nowhere in the entire book of Daniel where he uses a place name symbolically. He always has a literal application. And so should I take verses 40 to 43 and say, oh, this little part, we break all the rules in Daniel and we make this one symbolic? Or should I go by Daniel's rules? When we imposed Revelation rules on those 3 verses of Daniel, we got in trouble. If you go by what it says, it now makes all the sense in the world. Egypt goes down, that's radical Islam. Anybody know where radical Islam had its beginnings in the 1920s, modern radical Islam? In Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood. God doesn't miss. I still expect Egypt to radicalize. Just remember, the last free election in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood won it and then had it overthrown by a military coup. Oh, that military coup leader is still in charge and he has elections, but they're not free ones. How do I know that? Anybody that runs against him runs from jail. They get thrown in jail, and all their supporters get thrown in jail. It makes it really hard to vote from jail. So he always wins. But he doesn't like radical Islam. That's what he's fighting against, but he's sitting on a pressure cooker that's going to blow someday. Moderate Islam follows papal-led Christianity. Most Muslims don't like radical Islam. And if there's a holy war between the Christian world and the radical Muslim world, no, they'd rather be with the Christian world than the radical Muslim world. Why? Radical Muslims have killed more moderate Muslims than Christians have killed moderate Muslims. They know where they're safer. And then we have that remnant that comes together. All right. Now, in 2011, when the Review and Herald published our first edition of the book, I kind of went out on a limb. What they thought was out on a limb, I thought it's just what Daniel said. This is not my prediction. This is Daniel's prediction, and based on his prediction, this is what I was expecting. All right? Radical Islam would anger the papacy. The papacy, the Pope, would call for war. But he's the man of peace. He didn't call for war, right? No, the Bible says he's going to do it again. We had the Crusades when the Pope called for war. We had the Ottoman conflict, or the Holy League, when the Pope called for war. So every time the Pope calls for war, it shows up in this prophecy. So I'm expecting he's going to call for war again. The U.S. in it would become the military enforcer. That's Revelation 13. We've taught that for a long time. Radical Islam would be overthrown. Moderate Islam would follow papal-led Christianity. And some Muslims would follow Jesus in the Bible. Straightforward expectations. 2011, nothing had happened in fulfillment in Daniel 11 for over 100 years. But I knew someday the clock would start moving again. There's often you have 200-300 year pauses in Daniel 11. And so to have 100 and some years, not a big deal. But it was going to happen sometime, and it looked like it could be soon. 2014, they began the tick off one right after another. And if you don't know Daniel 11, you didn't know that prophecy was being fulfilled in front of your eyes. Here we go. July 1, 2014. For the first time since the Ottoman Empire, we had a functioning caliphate. It's the Islamic State. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the self-proclaimed leader of the Islamic State stretching across Iraq and Syria, has vowed to lead the conquest of Rome as he called on Muslims to immigrate to his new land to find under its banner around the globe. Okay, so you have a caliphate, and on its very first day of existence, I wasn't expecting this. It says it's on a conquest of Rome. They didn't mess around. They jump right in to do what the prophecy says. They're going after Rome. The only question is, would it get the Pope mad? Would he call for war? Believe it or not, it only took 5.5 weeks before the Pope called for war. Once you have a caliphate, the papacy doesn't function well with the caliphate around. Why? Well, the Pope considers he's going to become the leader of the world, and the world will be Christian, right? The caliph believes he will be the leader of the world, and the world will be Muslim. They're exclusive of each other once you get both of those guys on the ground. 5.5 weeks later, August 7, 2014, Pope Francis appealed to world leaders on Thursday to help end the crisis in northern Iraq after a sweeping advance by radical Islamic State militants forced thousands of residents of Iraq's biggest Christian town to flee their homes. His Holiness addresses an urgent appeal to the international community to take action to end the humanitarian tragedy now underway. He calls for military action. Daniel says it will be like a whirlwind when he does that. Well, the next expectation is the Pope doesn't have much of a military, but the U.S. does. And Revelation 13 says he becomes the enforcer, the U.S. for the papacy. The very next day, Obama says America is coming to help. Within 36 hours of the papal call for action, the United States began to attack the Islamic State, and the U.S. had never attacked the Islamic State before that. Pope calls for action and gets it, and it's led by the United States. Now, on August 7, 2014, when the Pope called for action, I was really frustrated. I'd been waiting for this day. I was expecting it, and so I was kind of excited when it happened. It's just, it's confirming what I've been thinking, but I was at an ASI convention in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And because Adventists have been ignoring Daniel 11, nobody seemed to want to hear that I was excited about fulfilled prophecy. They were, no. Islam is not a player in prophecy. And there was a guy sitting in an exhibit just 3 or 4 exhibits down from me. And there was a little time period where there wasn't anybody coming through the exhibit hall, and I slipped over and talked to him. And I said, you don't need to read this, but I'll give you this book and give you these DVDs if you're willing to look at them. And I went ahead and explained to him what I thought was happening in our world right then. And he said, yes, I will read them. I'll take them. And that's when Bob Falkenberg Jr. became a senior, became a real supporter of our ministry for the last 2 years of his life, and was working behind the scenes tirelessly to try and get people to take it seriously. So August 7 was a good day in that sense. And in case you didn't know, Bob Falkenberg Sr., he's a former General Conference president. Well, some of the news media said, the Pope he couldn't have meant military action. The United States jumped the gun on that. The Pope was calling for humanitarian action. And within a week, out came a whole series of papal ambassadors to say, no, the Pope wants military action. The Holy See's ambassador to the United Nations, Silvano Tomasi, this weekend supported U.S. airstrikes aimed at halting the advance of Sunni Islamic State militants, calling for intervention now before it's too late. While the Vatican vocally disapproved of the U.S.-led campaign in Iraq in 2003 and the 2013 plan for airstrikes on Syria, fearing both might make the situation worse for Christians on the ground, fears of ethnic cleansing by Islamists has forced a policy change. What made the Pope come out and call for war? Just admitted it. The Islamist, the Caliphate. Daniel 11, there's a king of the south, a caliph that pushes against the north, the Pope, and he calls for war and gets it. That's the very sequence that Daniel 11 is describing. And it's happening right in front of our eyes. And you're going, I didn't know that. Jesus said that we'd be sleepy. The 10 virgins, they were all sleeping, even the wise ones. But it's time to wake up and share a message with the world. Jihadi John says to Obama, the dog of Rome. Jihadi John was the guy who cut people's heads off for YouTube videos. He spoke with a British accent. He's no longer alive. He got hit by a drone strike shortly after calling Obama the dog of Rome. There were several reasons, but I'm sure calling Obama the dog of Rome was one of them. They also called the United States the dog of Rome. Why would Obama and the U.S. be the dog of Rome? Let's see. The Pope says sic 'em and the U.S. bites. Most Adventists didn't get that the United States was acting as the enforcer for the papacy, but the radical Muslims got it really quick because they were on the receiving ends of thousands upon thousands of bombs and missiles. They got the connection. But friends, we're already watching Daniel and Revelation being fulfilled. How long will we stay asleep before we get moving? In an unusually blunt endorsement of military action, the Vatican's top diplomat at the United Nations in Geneva has called for a coordinated international force to stop the so-called Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. He said the joint statement originated with Russia, which traditionally sees itself as a protector of Orthodox Christians in the Middle East. Boy, that one's got all kinds of interesting things in it. Russia. We've often called Russia atheistic. Putin considers himself the defender of Orthodox Christianity in the Middle East. Look at this one. We believe that Revelation 13:3, and it says all the world wonders after the beast, that the world will follow the papacy, right? But we've never really given a good explanation of why. Here's the simple explanation of why. At the time of the Crusades, the Christian world followed the Pope because they were afraid of Islam. At the time of the Ottomans, the Christian world followed the Pope because they're afraid of Islam. At the time of the end, the Christian world follows the Pope because they're afraid of Islam. Why is Russia and the papacy working together at the UN? Because they don't like radical Islam. So first the United States and their allies follow the Pope. Then Russia and their allies follow the Pope. Oh, China doesn't like radical Islam. India doesn't like radical Islam. Myanmar doesn't like radical Islam. All over the world, they don't like radical Islam. So it would be really important to keep that in mind. Then we have this one about Obama's race to chaos, and it's now Trump's as well. These are unprecedented developments veering so far from the norm and happening so fast that consequences are piling up faster than they can be comprehended. Alliances built over decades are shattered in a relative flash, inviting aggression and endless conflict. The toxic brew of Islamic fanaticism and nuclear proliferation could ignite a world conflagration. And friends, that's still where we are. And what happens while the world's afraid of radical Islam? The Pope rises in power. But shrewdly, methodically, and with a showman's flair, the soft-spoken 78-year-old Argentinian Jesuit priest named Pope Francis showed Thursday that he is running to become president of the planet, and the Huffington Post was ready to endorse him. Then we had an immigration crisis. I don't think this wave can stop, said Sonia Licht of the International Center for Democratic Transition. The global north must be prepared that the global south is on the move, the entire global south. This is not just a problem for Europe, but for the whole world. And right about then, we started one of the most interesting presidential campaigns in modern history. And one presidential candidate started talking about building a wall on the southern border. By the way, which border does Mexico worry about controlling? Their southern border. The south is pushing against the north everywhere in the world. And in Europe, it's a Muslim immigration into Europe from the Middle East and North Africa that's changing the politics of Europe rapidly right now. Because the anti-immigration, anti-Muslim parties are gaining power across Europe at this time. The world is being set up for a holy war. Now let me just say this. When you have destabilized political situations, your risk goes up. Why? Well, the Pope has a problem. It's a sex abuse crisis, right? But if you can get your people focused on something else, like a war with radical Islam, you'd do a lot better on covering up your problems. Does Trump have any political problems? Yeah, what if he could get the world uniting behind him over a war with radical Islam? He almost got a perfect excuse. The White House was almost attacked this week. It was stopped just short before it happened. What about Netanyahu? Oh, he's got all kinds of charges pending against him at the moment. A real war would be helpful to him right now, too. He's actually said a war with Iran, it would be better sooner than later. Putin, he wouldn't mind having a war that he could unite his people behind. The world, let's go for radical Islam. The people in charge of the caliphate or Iran and Turkey, they would all like to see a war to bring on their caliphate stronger. The world is primed for this right now, folks. Will it happen right away? I don't know if the angels are going to let back the winds of strife. But man, I can tell they're holding on because everything's ready and it's not moving. Trump was then asked during the campaign what he would do with radical Islam. He said, the point is, they, radical Islam, want to do serious harm. We have to take them out. We have to take them out very, very swiftly and viciously if necessary. We've got to destroy the brand of jihad. Very, very swiftly and viciously does sound an awful lot like a whirlwind, doesn't it? As Daniel's description. When he said that, I thought, man, this is interesting, but this guy probably will never win. And he did win, that is. And look what he said during his inauguration address. We will reinforce old alliances and form new ones and unite the civilized world against radical Islamic terrorism, which we will eradicate completely from the face of the earth. Daniel 11 says radical Islam goes down. Now, remember, I put all this in print based on Daniel 11 in 2011. These things were not surprising me. I was expecting them based on prophecy. And we're watching this stuff clicking off one after another. Where does Trump go on his first trip? I couldn't make this kind of stuff up. Saudi Arabia, where the king of the south originates from. Israel, the one caught in the middle. And the papacy, where the king of the north originates from. 3 for 3 on his first trip. And look what he says about it. It wasn't an accident. The visit to Saudi Arabia, he said, will include a truly historic gathering in Saudi Arabia with leaders from all across the Muslim world. We will begin to construct a new foundation of cooperation and support with our Muslim allies to combat extremism, terrorism, and violence. He's trying to gather the moderate Muslim world together to fight radical Islam. And he's working together with the Pope in Israel. Yep, those are the players. And radical Islam, man, they were out trying to really stir up the holy war. You see, they believe if they can have a holy war, then they can conquer the world. And they will set up their worldwide capital in a place called Al-Quds. Well, so what did they do? November of 17, they called for an attack on the Pope. Didn't happen. November of 18, they again called for an attack on the Pope. If they could just get an assassination of the Pope, they know they can get a holy war going. But they haven't been able to get it yet. A few days later, Trump takes a step. You see, the U.S. military is now fighting a narrative battle. They change part of their techniques. If the radical Muslims say they're going to do something, the U.S. moves ahead and targets their narrative. And here's what they do. On December 6th, Trump says he's going to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. Boy, that got the Muslims excited. Within a week, there's a meeting in Turkey with the anti-American embassy in Jerusalem idea as the top of the agenda. And here's what Soleimani says. Soleimani, commander of the Al-Quds force, says his nation is ready to support Palestinian forces in Gaza Strip, days after the U.S. recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Man, this one's loaded too. Number one, Soleimani is commander of the Iranian Al-Quds force. The Al-Quds force are the special forces of Iran trained to fight outside of Iran. Do you remember where I said that the radical Muslims want to set up their capital for the world? The city of Al-Quds. So why do they get so excited when the U.S. says we're going to put the U.S. embassy in Jerusalem? I want to show you something about our news media. They have the word Jerusalem right here. They have the word Al-Quds right here. Same paragraph. How many times have you seen the U.S. media acknowledge that Al-Quds and Jerusalem are the same place? Al-Quds is the Arabic name for Jerusalem. Radical Islam intends to set up its world capital of the Islamic world when it makes all the world Islamic in Jerusalem. What city does Daniel say gets caught in the middle? Jerusalem. Man, it's right in front of us, folks. But the media is covering it. I don't know how long they'll be successful and exactly why that they cover it. But it is the way it is. Now, the other part of this, Soleimani and the Al-Quds force are Shiite Muslim. The people in the Gaza Strip are Sunni Muslim. They're supposed to be fighting each other. But when the United States says we're going to set up the capital in Jerusalem, they start calling for unity between Shiite and Sunni so that they can go after Jerusalem together. Interesting. In moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, Trump is beginning to unite radical Sunni and Shiite Muslim. And there may be a method to it. If you want to know who the radicals are, Jerusalem will let you know. Because he said he was going to eradicate them. There we go. Let's try going the right way again. Saudi Arabia's powerful crown prince Mohammed bin Salman has described Turkey as part of a triangle of evil along with Iran and hardline Islamist groups. The Saudi prince also accused Turkey of trying to reinstate the Islamic Caliphate abolished nearly a century ago when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. You say, yeah, the Islamic State isn't so strong anymore. It's not. But Iran and Turkey are stepping up, wanting to become the new caliphate leaders. And they want Jerusalem as well. Remember, it's the Iranian Al-Quds force, the Jerusalem force, that is trained to fight outside of Iran. Why would they have a Jerusalem force trained to fight outside of Iran? If Mexico started having a Washington, D.C. force and starting to threaten the United States, would the U.S. military kind of not like the Washington, D.C. force of Mexico very well? Yeah, that's what's happening in Iran and Israel. But anyway, the Saudi prince says, oh, we've got a problem in Islam. It's the evil triangle. Turkey, Iran, and Islamists, they all want a caliphate by force. And then in the Atlantic, in an interview, he goes on to say this. In this triangle, they are trying to promote the idea that our duty as Muslims is to reestablish the caliphate. That the glory of Islam is in building an empire by force. We have no duty anymore to fight to spread Islam, but in the triangle of evil, they want to manipulate Muslims, to tell them that their duty as Muslims requires the establishment of a Muslim empire. I believe that Palestinians and Israelis have the right to have their own land, but we have to have a peace agreement to assure the stability for everyone and to have normal relations. So he just called Iran and Turkey the part of a triangle of evil. And he said, Israel has a right to exist. Within days, there was gunfire in the palace. There was an assassination attempt. He survived, but he became a lot less visible after that. Then in May, the U.S. Embassy opens in Jerusalem, exactly 70 years to the day from the founding of the nation of Israel. What's so important about that? Look at this coin. This is minted by the Temple Group, which is a group that is ready to rebuild the temple at a moment's notice up on the Temple Mount. They have all the furniture built. They have the priests trained. They have everything ready. They just need the go-ahead. This is their temple coin. It's what you would pay your temple tax with or your offerings with if the temple's reestablished. They've already made some. Oh. Whose face is on it? Trump? Why would a Jewish religious group have Trump's face on a coin? Well, in the background, there's another man's face. That's Cyrus the Great. After 70 years of captivity, Cyrus says to the Jews, Jerusalem is yours, you may return to Jerusalem, and they rebuild the temple. After 70 years of statehood, Trump says, Jerusalem is your capital, and they say, we're going to rebuild the temple. They see Trump as the new Cyrus. Interestingly, a lot of American Christian groups see Trump as a Cyrus-type figure. Wow. It's an interesting world that we live in. Erdogan then predicts war between the Cross and the Crescent. Erdogan is the president of Turkey, a NATO member. And he's predicting war between Austria and the Muslim world, or Europe and the Muslim world. He kind of forgot his alliance there in NATO, didn't he? Expect that one to change. I'm not sure how long he will remain in NATO. Then Iran was threatening the United States, and Trump warned Iran, threaten us and you will suffer. And he goes on to say, suffer like few countries have ever suffered in history. Here's the Iranian response. A picture's worth 1,000 words. The man with the radio, Soleimani, the commander of the Al-Quds Brigade. He claims to have over 1,000 terrorist cells already planted in the United States. He's called in a strike. Somebody hits the White House. You see the U.S. flag falling. And here's one little bit of English under the Farsi. We will crush the USA under our feet. That was his response to Trump. Does our world have any threats in it at the moment? Yeah. And just remember, there was a terrorist attack planned for this last week at the White House. I think the government found out 2 days ahead. when the guy that was going to do it tried to buy explosives from a guy that was out there looking for terrorists trying to sell explosives? What if he would have bought them from a different arms dealer that wasn't a U.S. agent? It would have been a different story. So that brings me back to this. Radical Islam goes down. Trump and the world want to see it happen. Moderate Islam is already following. And then we have God's remnant. Let's take a look at that remnant. But news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. And he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end and no one will help him. So radical Islam goes down, and then the king of the north gets really mad because there's a small group that refuses to follow him. You know, those people caught in the middle, those Sabbath keepers. He takes out radical Islam. They're gone. Moderate Islam follows. Hey, you want to know a perfect reason for a Sunday law? Are you Sunday Christian or Friday Muslim? Majority of Muslims don't even care which day they worship on. There's nothing in the Quran that says to worship on Friday. That's just a tradition. By the way, there's nothing in the Bible that says to worship on Sunday. That's just a tradition too. The only one that is a command of God gets caught in the middle and hated by both sides. Well, so he goes out to destroy and annihilate God's people. Now I want you to notice something. Edom, Moab, and Ammon, that's western Jordan. Those are the people that escape and follow Jesus. At the same time, Revelation 18:4, says out of Babylon, God calls a remnant. Babylon was the original king of the north. When you see Babylon in Revelation, it's the same as reading king of the north in Daniel 11. God calls a remnant out of papal-led Christianity, and out of Edom, Moab, and Ammon, the Abrahamic family within the Islamic world, he calls a remnant out of that as well. And so they unite and share the loud cry together. Michael, Jesus stands up, and you have a time of trouble like there never was. And Jesus delivers his people. That's Daniel 11. Adventists want to know, what did Ellen White have to say about it? Now, I want to get my Bible for a bit because I need to use this illustration. In the early church, Christians followed the Bible as their authority. Was that good or bad? I hope you think it's good. A few years later, they started putting traditions over Scripture. Was that a good idea or a bad idea? Bad idea. Muhammad comes along and says, you know, the Bible was good, but Christians have messed it up. Here's the Quran, and he puts the Quran over Scripture. Caused trouble. Joseph Smith comes along and said, you know, the Bible was good, but Christians have corrupted it. Here's the Book of Mormon. Do you catch a trend? Ellen White comes along. The Bible's good. Are we going to put Ellen White above or below? She says she's a lesser light leading to the greater light. I know people in the Seventh-day Adventist Church that tell me, unless Ellen White says there's going to be a conflict with Islam and Christianity at the end, I won't believe it. Well, you know, Ellen White never really explained Daniel 11. Really, she did not. She's a lesser light leading to the greater light, she said, right? She's really clear on that. Get this. By not explaining Daniel 11, the part that says it is the prophecy for the time of the end, Ellen White is still the lesser light leading to the greater light. Because by not explaining it, she's making us take the last warning message directly from Scripture, not Ellen White says. It completely matches what she's done. Now let's take a look at some of what she did say. People have told me if Ellen White did not explain a future conflict between Islam and Christianity, then Islam has no prophetic importance. All right, here's what she said. The time has come for Daniel to stand in his lot. Okay, number one, she's talking Daniel. Number two, stand in his lot, is a reference to the closing words of the 10, 11, 12 vision. So she's talking about the last part of Daniel, the part that she doesn't comment on very much and that we haven't studied very much. The time has come for Daniel to stand in his lot. The time has come for the light given him to go to the world as never before. Yeah, we haven't taken that part of Daniel to the world very well. If those for whom the Lord has done so much will walk in the light, their knowledge of Christ and the prophecies relating to him will be greatly increased as they near the close of this earth's history. And there's going to be a great increase. And she wrote this in 1899 after she wrote the book Great Controversy. She wrote this in 1899 after we had all the disagreements about who's the king of the north and who the king of the south is. What is that telling you? If it's going to have a great increase from that section of Daniel, then you're not going to find it in the writings of the pioneers or the writings of Ellen White. You're going to find it in Scripture. And believe it or not, 10, 11, 12 talk more about the ministry of Jesus and how he delivers us than the rest of the Daniel does. So it is about the end, and it is about Jesus, just like she says. I was shown the inhabitants of the earth in the utmost confusion, war, bloodshed, privation, want, famine, and pestilence were abroad in the land. As these things surrounded God's people, they began to press together. Suffering, perplexity, privation caused reason to resume its throne. What brings God's people to the point of being reasonable? Lots of trouble, right? What is God saying? My people are so worried about their things, their reputations, they don't want to get laughed at, whatever it is, that they're not being reasonable. So he's going to let us lose all that stuff, and then we'll become reasonable and share the gospel like we're supposed to. I have a suggestion for you. If you happen to like some of your stuff and don't want to lose it all, get reasonable faster. The faster you get reasonable, the less he has to take away to get you reasonable. That makes perfect sense, doesn't it? You look over history, that's what God did with people. So get busy sharing the gospel. Then it says there was a little time of peace. Keep that in mind. Once more the inhabitants of the earth were presented before me. And again everything was in utmost confusion, strife, war, and bloodshed, with famine and pestilence raged everywhere. Other nations were engaged in this war and confusion, and then men's hearts failed them for fear. There's a time of war, gets God's people's attention. Then there's a time of war again, and then men's hearts fail them for fear. Let's take a look at the chart. Here we have a time of war that gets the world's attention. A short time of peace for the last warning cry, and then we have a time of trouble like there never was, including the Battle of Armageddon. And then men's hearts fail them for fear? Oh, when Jesus shows up in the clouds, you telling me the wicked are going to be happy about it? They're going to be calling for rocks and mountains to fall on them, right? That's scared. That matches Daniel 11, folks. Here's another one. The God who gave who again? Daniel. Instruction regarding the closing scenes of this earth's history will certainly confirm the testimony of his servants, as at the appointed time they give the loud cry. All the messages given from 1840 to 44 are to be made forcible now. For there are many people who have lost their bearings. The messages are to go to all the churches. The message was given, and there should be no delay in repeating the message, for the signs of the times are fulfilling. When the 1840, the 44 repeat happens, prophecy will be happening, being fulfilled in front of our eyes. The closing work must be done. A great work will be done in a... Remember, God gives a short time of peace between those wars? A message will soon be given by God's appointment that will swell into a loud cry, and then look at this. Then Daniel will stand in his lot. That's a quote from the last part of Daniel again. Over and over she does this. When she talks about Daniel standing in his lot, it's tied to events right around the loud cry. Okay, what does she mean by 1840 to 44? And here's where it gets really exciting. Great controversy. She's talking about the Millerite movement and Josiah Litch. At the very time specified, Turkey, which was Islamic, through her ambassadors, accepted the protection of the Allied powers of Europe and thus placed herself under the control of the Christian nations. The event exactly fulfilled the prediction. If you ever run into an Adventist theologian or pastor or anybody else that says there is no Islam in prophecy, say, well, sorry, you're just contrary to Ellen White. 1840s, 1850s charts had it. Ellen White's really clear right here that that's it. All right? She also called it a remarkable fulfillment of prophecy. When it became known, multitudes were convinced of the correctness of the principles of prophetic interpretation adopted by Miller and his associates, and a wonderful impetus or power was given to the Advent movement. What gave the Millerite movement power? The fall of the Ottoman Islamic Empire as predicted by Josiah Litch in August 11, 1840. And Ellen White says from 1840 to 44 will be repeated. Men of learning and position united with Miller both in preaching and in publishing his views, and from 1840 to 44, the work rapidly extended. Now let's go back and look at the chart. 1840, we have a fall of Islam. It gives power to a prophetic movement known as the Millerite movement. They proclaim the judgment and the coming of Jesus, but Jesus does not come. Ellen White now said it's going to be repeated. Let's see. We have a fall of Islam. A prophetic movement, the loud cry, that proclaims the end of the judgment, and Jesus does come. Does that sound like a repeat? It's right down the line, except Jesus does come this time. I have never seen the pieces fit together in prophecy as I have since I've understood Daniel 11. Daniel 11 puts the whole thing together. And it said in the prophecy it would be understood at the time of the end. I think it's time to take Jesus and the Bible seriously. Oh, I'm going to back up. Remember Revelation chapter 10? There's going to be a little book opened. It's going to be sweet as honey, but it's going to turn bitter. That's this episode right here. And then he says you're going to have to go do it all over again. That's right here. But he also said time no longer. 1844 was a time prophecy from Revelation, 1840, time prophecies from Revelation 9. 1844, a prophecy from Daniel 8. This was all based on time prophecies. This has no time prophecy. It is a sequence prophecy. Revelation is saying you're going to have to do it all over again, but it's with no time. This matches Ellen White and Revelation. It's all fitting. So I think it's time to take Jesus and the Bible really, really seriously. I also think it's time to study Daniel 11 and 12. If you haven't studied it before, it's time to get serious. Sharing with others. And we have books, we have videos, we have tracts. Right now you have the opportunity of a public seminar. You can also get some of our materials and have home seminars afterwards. Small group, just run a DVD or get the books and read through and discuss it. Let me just illustrate a little bit. I was getting off an elevator in Cincinnati, Ohio. I was wearing a shirt. Whoops, don't have that shirt on right now. I'll have it tonight. Islam and Christianity Prophecy Seminars. Getting off this elevator, and there were probably about 5 really tall, athletically built guys. They were big. And they were waiting to get on the elevator. There was a Cincinnati Reds ball game going on across the street. There's an ASI convention going on in the hotel conference, in the big convention center. These guys weren't at the ASI conference. My guess is they were attending a Cincinnati Reds ball game. I come off that elevator, and the biggest guy in the group, a huge black guy, steps forward and he taps me on the chest. Do you normally walk around cities tapping people on the chest? Not if you're smart. But when you're this big, you can. Especially when you have 4 or 5 guys almost as big standing behind you. He says, "What does that mean?" I pulled out my map, my left hand. Italy even hangs down in the Mediterranean nicely. All right? And I go through Daniel 11. You see, there's this really neat prophecy in the Bible. You have Persia, Greece, and then Greece splits north and south. Jerusalem gets caught in the middle. Then Rome comes in from the north. And then Rome splits. Christian north, Islamic south, and Jerusalem and God's people get caught in the middle. And I go through, and there are 3 conflicts. Radical Islam, the Crusades, Turkey, and radical Islam at the time of the end. And radical Islam goes down and moderate Islam follows papal-led Christianity. Bam! I've done Daniel 11 really fast with these big guys looking down on me. And he asked several other questions. His buddies all want to leave. But the big guy wants to stay and ask questions. And one elevator after another is leaving behind me, and the big guy's still asking questions. After a few minutes, the big guy has his questions answered. And the group of guys step on the elevator or watch over, and they hit the top floor on the elevator bank. As the elevator's leaving, I'm thinking, okay, those were really big, athletic guys, and they've got money there on the top floor. My guess, I was just talking to a group of NBA players. I mean, they were big, athletic guys. They weren't football players. They weren't that kind of big. They were tall and muscular. And I'm thinking, probably NBA players. When's the last time you've had an NBA player walk up to you and ask questions about the Bible? This topic can do that. Do you know that you've often heard people in your circle talking about Islam and where's the world headed, haven't you? You have an opportunity of interjecting good news. This is in the Bible. Here's how it's going to end. Are you trusting Jesus? It's going to be good news. I was in the Las Vegas airport switching airplanes. And a young lady was walking through the airport carrying a little glass case. So you could see what was in it. There was a crown with a white sash or something wrapped around it, but I couldn't see what the sash read. I'm guessing she's some kind of a beauty queen or rodeo queen or something. And so I get on the plane. It's a Southwest airplane, and I get on early because I fly them a lot. And a little bit later, this young lady is walking down the center aisle. I'm sitting on the center aisle. My wife is sitting by the window. Why do you do that? Because if the people don't like center seats, and that way you might get a little room if the plane's not completely full. The lady comes along and looks at the seat between us and says, "May I have that seat?" I said, "No, but you can have this one." And I just slid over, and she takes the aisle seat. She says, "Oh, wow, I didn't know I was going to get an aisle seat." And she goes to sit down. I said, "But you got to tell me what's in your little glass box." And she laughs. She slides it under the seat, and she says, "Well, I'm Miss Idaho. I'm just coming back from the Miss USA pageant." A little bit later, I'm working on my computer with all this Islam and Christianity stuff, and she's watching. And a bit later, she says, "I shouldn't have noticed what's on your computer, but I did. Are you a teacher or something?" I said, "Not really. I'm a prophecy seminar presenter, and I do Islam and Christianity." And she starts asking questions. They're interesting questions. And I looked at her and said, "You wouldn't happen to be a Muslim, would you, Miss Idaho?" Yes, she is. An inactive Muslim. I didn't see that one coming. And so we had a good talk. And you know, she, like many Muslims, is wondering if Islam is really a religion of peace, why is it tearing the world apart? And I get that opportunity to say, you know what? God's got people that love their enemies and are looking for the true God of love, truth, and forgiveness within both Islam and Christianity. He wants us to come together and follow Jesus in the Bible. Do you realize that this actually gives hope to a Christian or a Muslim that hears it? I can make friends with Muslims and have many times. One more story in an airport. I was changing flights in the Minneapolis airport. And as my custom is, I get off one plane, I walk and find the gate where my next plane is leaving from and make sure that it's actually listed as being at that gate. And then I go for a walk. And so I'd walk through my gate area, and I've got 20, 30 minutes before I need to be back to the gate. And so I went for a walk. I come back about 20 minutes later. The gate area is now relatively full. And here's how it gets full. Somebody sits down, they leave luggage in the seat beside them, and somebody in luggage and somebody in luggage. You've seen that, right? People want their space. So I walk in there and I figure, okay, that's fine, I can stand. And a man moves his luggage and says, sir, you can have this seat. Now, maybe cute girls get that experience, but I don't. And I'm going, huh? He said, sir, please sit down. I would pay money to sit beside you on the airplane. And I looked at him. He said, I saw your shirt half an hour ago, and I've been thinking about it ever since. Sit down. Okay. Now, I pray every day, and I hope you do the same, not just praying, but pray that God will give you an opportunity to share the gospel or God's truth with somebody during the day. And sometimes God is going, now, wake up, it's now time. When somebody says, please sit down, it's time. Okay. And so I sat down. He said, I've been thinking about it. And Islam and Christianity, they can't be anything alike. They're like polar opposites, north and south. That's when I started to laugh. He says, what's so blankety blank funny? Oh, this guy could swear. Actually, it was really hard for him to give a paragraph without a swear word in it anywhere. And he was on his way home from work. You know, he works for a month or so, and then he's off for a few weeks, and he works for a month or whatever it is, and he's off. He works in the oil fields of Saudi Arabia. He's on his way home to the U.S. I said, sir, I'm not laughing at you. I'm just laughing about what you said. It matches what the Bible said. You're north and south. I open my Bible to Daniel 11 and show him the north and south in conflict, and show him the Crusades, the Ottomans, and the time of the end. This man in his 40s, an American citizen, grown and raised in the U.S. just like you have been, had never read a Bible in his life. But he knew how to swear really well. He pulled out his cell phone and began taking pictures of my Bible so he could read Daniel 11 on his own on the plane. This was not Southwest Airlines. They called for first class boarding, and this guy got up and walked to the plane. He didn't pay to sit beside me on the plane. Bummer, it would have been nice to be in first class. But as he walked away from me, he turned around and looked back at me and said, I will be on your website tonight, because I'd given him the website information. I've heard that phrase quite often. Never saw him again. But friends, if you can reach a beauty queen, it can reach a hard-swearing roughneck in the oil fields in Saudi Arabia, can reach a sports person to get them asking questions. Why can't it reach your friends and your family? It's got a really good chance because it's real stuff from the real world today. And then also, make sure you're praying for people around you and praying that your eyes will be open. I don't know what time I need to close, but I might have a couple minutes for questions. I don't know. What? Right now? About 5 minutes? Do we have any questions? What I'm really hoping is you're going to take some of the brochures that are left, and you'll go invite people to our seminar. Do you realize they have not missed opening night yet? Because we have 2 of them. One last night, one tonight at 5:45. And even if they come in the next couple of days, they're still going to catch it. And Tuesday night is the one that I go long on. And it's going to be our high point of attendance. And if you can get somebody here only once, get them here Tuesday night. All right? Questions? Do you have any? Yes, sir.
So do you see Trump as a fulfillment of Bible prophecy?
Daniel says God sets up and takes down kings. I see Trump doing exactly what would be expected based on these prophecies. Let me say this about politics. I run in dangerous territory constantly on this one. I try not to be political. I call myself an equal opportunity offender because both sides have plenty of issues. Here's what God asks us to do: to remember that he sets up and takes down leaders. Number two, that we're supposed to be praying for our leaders. Praying for their success and for them to understand Jesus Christ. And I think God has a sense of humor. Because between the last two presidents, everybody's had practice in praying for somebody they don't like. And we're not supposed to be praying for their death. So, do I think Trump is in prophecy? Well, he's doing the things that some leader will be doing. And there are Catholics that view Trump as a parallel to Constantine the Great, who united church and state. And the similarities are really huge between Constantine and Trump. And in Revelation 13, somebody in the United States unites church and state. So, pray for the leaders. Be obedient to the word. Yes?
Okay, so I'm going to piggyback off of that. You had mentioned that you were not surprised, I guess, or maybe surprised that Trump was the president, that Trump won.
Well, I was thinking if he came in, Daniel 11 could easily be fulfilled, but everybody says he's not coming in, but he did.
Well, see, when Brexit happened, I turned and said to my husband, I was like, pretty sure that he's going to get elected. And I was like, I hope he's going to get elected. And in fact, my husband actually doubted me.
Yeah.
Brexit happened, Trump's going to get elected. And my question is, though, if it's parallel, if you've been able to see the parallels in the Bible that are pointing to what the prophecy has said, and you're saying you're not surprised, I'm interested why you were surprised.
Okay. It was just, he was so out of the norm for anything we've had. And the media was sure that wasn't going to happen. Personally, I don't like the personality very well, but I was hoping he was going to win because it would be likely the fastest way to see Jesus come. That's my own twisted logic, okay? And at the same time, realize this. Trump has a tremendous amount of enemies. If he succeeds in overcoming them, it will embolden him to not follow the rules. If he does not succeed and he's run out of office, it gets really interesting. Because a man by the name of Michael Pence becomes president, who is a much smoother operator, but possibly more radical when it comes to the thought of making Christianity the law of the land. He happens to be a believer in reestablishing the Temple Mount, the temple on the Temple Mount, Michael Pence. So if Trump goes down, Daniel 11 fulfillment may accelerate. So I'm watching with interest. I see several possible scenarios here, and I could be totally wrong on them. God doesn't give the detail. He gives the outline. Radical Islam goes down, moderate Islam follows papal-led Christianity, and God's remnant. Those things are happening right now. Egypt needs to radicalize, and it's just a hairbreadth away. I'm reading articles about that one. The fear is two nations could collapse in the Middle East now. Egypt and or Saudi Arabia. Either one goes down, it blows it apart. And they would crumble from the inside. Based on prophecy, I'm expecting it to be Egypt. Because that's what it says, Egypt goes down. By the way, in Daniel 11, when the king of the south goes down for the last time, it names Egypt, Libya, Ethiopia, Western Jordan. Do those have to do with Islam, communism, or secularism? They're all Islamist areas. The context is pretty clear. Got to follow it. You're working together. Okay. Yeah.
Left there in the 60s. You know, there's a huge influx of Islam into England as in other European countries. I'm wondering what you think is going to happen there in the situation. It's kind of in flux right now.
Okay, there's an interesting character I've been watching for many years. A guy by the name of Boris Johnson. While working for the BBC, before he became active in politics so much, he put together a documentary on the breakup of the Roman Empire, Christian North, Islamic South. He's one of the few that talked about it as north-south instead of east-west. He kind of got it in his documentary back there for the BBC. And I've been watching him coming up and up and up. So I'm just going to say keep an eye on him. Oh, well, he's a lot like Trump in many ways. And possibly a little smoother than Trump, but still pretty rough. And he's an interesting character. And keep an eye on him. By the way, he's pushing for a relatively hard exit from the European Union. And he's not exactly friendly to May at the moment. We've got to go. Let's close with prayer. Dear Lord, thanks for giving us a prophecy that actually matches our real world today. And so in light of that, Lord, I ask that you pour out your Spirit, wake us up, get us digging into your word and sharing it with everybody around us. In Jesus' name I ask it, and I thank you. Amen.